point, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll call to order the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I will read the statement of announcement. The meeting notice announcing the date, time, and place of the April 28, 2020 Finance and Audit Committee meeting was distributed April 27th, 2020 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office and on the website. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, or other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested in advance. All right, so I wanted to next go to adopt the agenda. Anybody have any changes to the agenda? And if it's good, can I get approval for the adoption of the agenda?
Since we discussed it, I would say it would be appropriate to amend the agenda to reflect under item number 4 that the initial presentation will be made by Pat.
Okay.
Aside from that amendment, I would move to approve the agenda.
Okay. All right. So I don't need a second since there's just two of us. So the agenda is approved with that amendment. So the next item on the agenda is reviewing the minutes of the March 4th, 2020 meeting. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those minutes. Do you have any changes to those minutes?
I did not have any other changes, just furthering my thanks to Chris and Sandra for getting those prepared.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I would move to approve them as presented.
Okay, great. Okay, so minutes are approved as presented. All right, so the item number 4 on the agenda is the discussion of options related to addressing day program closures and funding. And Pat Malley is going to kick off that discussion.
Okay, well, thank you for having us and making time today. And of course, I'll be presenting this with Chris. And the last time we did this, I think I told Chris I was going to do it. And then after about 10 seconds, I gave him the entire ball and he spoke for an hour. So I might try that plan again today. Hopefully you saw the draft document we sent out last night and you might have perused it. It's kind of thick. It's about 5 pages. We finalized it and just a few immaterial word commas and dots, but no material changes. What we want to do is walk through these issues because they're serious issues in that there are large dollars involved in the short run due to the COVID-19 impact on day program closures. But that's only our short-term problem. That's just to get it through the fiscal year 20. And we do want to talk about the longer-term issue, which we're not looking for any type of motion or solution today, but just to use this forum to raise everybody's awareness as to the challenges that are in front of us, which are not small. And they're becoming a little bit more risky because COVID-19 seems like it's going to be, impact's going to be more protracted than maybe we first thought. So they're the 2 issues we want to cover. And again, there's a lot of data here. I don't want to read the memo. I just want to cover it at the level of detail that you think it needs, but most importantly, ask the questions, because what we're trying to do is get to a recommendation. And the best way we could format a recommendation is this is what we recommend. But there's 3 or 4 really important variables that reasonable people can look at these factors differently and come up with different conclusions. And I think that's what we're trying to portray to you as to this is what we think, but be clear enough as to what the alternatives are so that we're not giving you just one option, and that the other factors in there you can use your own independent judgment and help guide us as to where we ultimately need to land. So with that said, you want me to give you a deep dive detail on how we got here, or do you feel comfortable that you've kind of got the math? Or let me walk through it a little bit. Obviously on March 16th, the governor had an executive order where he limited groups of less than 100 not to meet, which affected our day programs. And Mary, the state director, ordered the closure of all day programs that have 100 people or more as staff and consumers. Essentially, all the day programs closed, and they're still closed from the facility-based perspective. Very quickly into it, we realized that we could recover some revenue from the day programs if we moved the day program services into the residential settings by the provider. And that's about 54% of the revenue, and 46% of the people can be served in the residential settings. And we think the providers have done a great job at making that shift and restoring billings. They're not at the pre-COVID levels, but they're climbing towards them. And we're projecting that they will ultimately get close enough that it will not affect the residential rate. But the at-home day program consumers who are at the facility are not being served. And if they are being served, it's just a very small percentage. You might be doing some group employment activities, but for all practical purposes, the at-home consumers are at home not receiving day services. And that's about...
Pat, I just have one question regarding that. So are boards looking at creative ways to change up how they serve these clients, either through, virtual contact, virtual programming, virtual, meetups, so to speak, so that people that are in the day program would be able to log in and talk to each other, see each other, have some contact. I know everyone is looking at ways to change how they connect with each other, from schools to businesses, from all across the board. And so I just am curious. I know this doesn't fix our problem right now, but curious if there's been any significant discussion on how to do something differently to provide services.
There has been lots of discussion around virtual provision of day programs. The problem is it's a unit issue and it's also a group rate. We have a 2-hour minimum unit. It is very hard to gather people virtually to sit for 2 hours, especially our folks, and to keep them engaged and active, some sort of something that we would consider a day program activity. It's not that we haven't asked the question, can we change our unit? That might be the better approach. How do we change the unit and how do we describe the activity? So that is still under discussion, but
okay, just one.
Yeah, it's not that it hasn't been thought of. It's a matter of it's got to be. We're looking at the unit changes, which that has not gone over. So at this point, we have not done that. But it's not that we're not discussing it. It's just probably going to be another amendment.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay.
Pat.
So from an immediate fiscal perspective, on March 16th, we lost all day program revenue. Again, as you know, we give them the money in advance, billings come back to us. And so the actual billing is 100%. We get the 70% match, and that's how the system works. The immediate 70% revenue loss that we're counting on was $228,000 a day. And that number has improved because as timeline has unfolded, the residential consumers are in the residences getting services provided, and the billings have increased. So we're about 40-45% billings of where we should be, and that's an estimate. We hope to get to at least what we did in the past with the day program, would be 54. But we're still looking at a substantial daily revenue loss of at least $120,000 a day in our 70% FMAP. And that means the money that we were counting on receiving, of which Chris does his cash flows, to get us to plus $1 on July 1st, we were counting on that money. So when that money is not coming in, from our perspective, given our low cash reserves, we are immediately projecting deficits. And if it wasn't for the CMS 6.2 FMAP increase, which we'll talk about later, and it's a key factor in what we're doing, we would have been running a deficit for the year. So again, like any
can I ask
price.
one question, Pat?
Sure.
We give them the money in advance. When is it divided up? Do we give them a payment each month, I'm assuming, for that? And when does that payment go out?
We give them a payment twice a month.
Twice a month.
And the prospective payment is for the residential and the at-home bands in a lump sum.
Right. So the bands are lumped together, right? There's not a
Yes.
discrete fund where you can say this much was within the band. We can't say this portion was day services, this portion was residential. It's just here's your band
Well,
payment.
we do have
Okay.
the ability to do that. And in fact, that was the first calculation we had done, was go through and identify. The problem is the band system's inherently flawed in that everybody is equally
Right.
taking advantage of the same exact services. So if you go into Board A, Board B, and Board C, the way the bands look at it is everybody's using the same services in the same proportion. Well, there's an inherent flaw in that assumption. But yes, we crawled inside Band B and I and actually was able to tease out the day program component. And that was the first version that we looked at.
Okay. And so we have made the payments then since everything was shut down March 16th. We've made one payment in March and we're made one payment in April, right? That is, we're not expecting to get the full billables.
Two in April.
Two in April. Okay, right. I
Yep.
forget what date. Sorry, I forget what date it is sometimes right now.
Right.
So so we're at least looking at two more in May and then two more in June before we hit the end of the fiscal year. Okay.
One in June.
One in June.
One in June.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
They get 3 payments in July. They get all of July's money in July and half of August. And in that pattern, they get the rest of August and half of September, rest of September, half of October. So that's how the cash flows work.
So if we were to just somehow just cut, and I don't know if there's any way we could do it right at this second, we would still be in the hole for the billables for the payments that have gone out. That one payment in March and the two payments in April.
Yeah, we're
Not that
paying
I'm
it.
suggesting that's what we're going to do, but
We're paying 100%. And now the question is, how do we want to address going forward or recouping backwards? There's all those options, but at the end of the day, we've not touched the band money.
right. Okay.
Although we are short revenue.
Right.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
So and then if you look at the chart on the bottom of page 1, do you guys have the handouts or okay. It just gives you some proportionality of the cumulative loss from March 16th to June 30th in 100% dollars, which are billable dollars, and then our match, which we absolutely need in order to have revenue to make it to the end of the year. So it is not a small problem. When we're looking to address this circumstance, and up through Thursday of last week, the FMAP number that we were getting from HHS was very fluctuating. You can read CMS documentation at 6.2% of our Medicaid billing, which we did our own internal analysis, and we were estimating $10 or $11 million per quarter. The numbers we were getting from HHS were not anywhere near that range. And so that gave us a lot of uncertainty as to what that FMAP number would be, because what that number is a major factor in what we can do. So on Friday, Director Baker contacted us, and his exact words were, he's estimating approximately 10,000 a quarter, 10 million a quarter based on pre-COVID-19 billings, meaning we expect post-COVID-19 billings to go down a click. So that 6.2% is probably going to be 10 million less whatever we have in decreased services going forward. But
it could be between 8 and 9 million for the second quarter, potentially.
Potentially. But we're not in the $3, $4, $5 million range. We're in the $8, $9, $10 million range. That would be my projections.
We just got to remember that it's based on normal billing. Okay, so that's what the projection was. Going forward, we don't know what normal billing is.
Right.
Unfortunately. So we would know after this first quarter
Yeah.
is over, and by then it's, a little late to make decisions for this fiscal year.
but I think it's safe to say 8, 9, 10 is a range. 8 would be, I would think, incredibly low if 10 is the starting point. But we're not in the 3, 4, 5 range. We are.
Right.
I know.
Because residential isn't changing. Residential is
I
residential.
am the glass half kind of person, and I like to plan.
She
for
likes to
worst case
squeeze
scenario.
pennies. All right.
I just like to plan for the worst
but
case scenario, and
it's-
if it's better, great. But
It is a factor. So when you're looking at the losses that we are going to sustain,
And those we've already sustained.
if we already sustained, if nobody does nothing, we're going to lose $12.7 million in billing and $8.9 million that was going to come off of Medicaid that we needed to get back to black ink on June 30th was not going to be there. And that is a major to-do. Okay, with the FMAP, whatever the estimates are for the first and second quarter together, we can cover most any contingency. The question is, what is optimal? What do we want to do? And when we looked at it, the first thing we came up with is what's the criteria we're going to make this decision by? I think that was a healthy process. And when you look at, well, let me back up a second. It's what are the possible sources? As you know, we have no cash reserves, and we've at least stopped the bleeding, and we're on an upward trend. Essentially, just did a cash flow analysis at the beginning of March, and we were looking at plus $1 million to year end, which was a great number considering how we've been dropping for a number of years. Providers, they have cash reserves. Providers have $64 million in cash reserves, and that's about 39 boards. 28 boards have greater than 500,000, and 11 have 500 or less. And we just made kind of a rough calculation. 5 boards have less than 100,000, which is indicative of financial limitations. I just talked about the FMAP. Obviously, that's a big asset that we can use to plug the gap. And then provider cost reductions. You know, if this was a 1-week hurricane, I don't think anybody's going to be in the mind of cost, the permanent cost reductions by providers. They come back, they bounce back, they go back to day programs, and billings resume. I think as this thing progressed, we're looking at a longer and longer bounce back trajectory. So the question is going to be, we can fix this gap through June 30th, but on July 1st, that gap is still there. So somewhere on the way, we have to make some judgments as to what kind of structural changes do we need to actually right-size operations to match the actual demand. And that's you can get 10 different views of that. Some people are more optimistic, some people are less optimistic. I can tell you, we met with the providers last Thursday, and we asked that as a closing question. There were 3 or 4 very vocal comments, and they were all in the trajectory of kind of what Robin said earlier. What other services are we going to do? Because they were not optimistic that things were going to resume in a very normal way. So it gets back to what are we going to do next year is a bigger problem. But now we said, when we make our decisions, and this is where you come in. I think if you go to middle of page 2, people can look at these, what I would call objectives or criteria, and we kind of weighed them out. And believe me, there was debate among ourselves. So we're not all in the same final decision, but we coalesced around our final plan. But the factors were, after any crisis, we're not going to cut your rate three days after a crisis. So we had to have time to stabilize. I thought the providers did a great job in moving their day program staff into the residential setting. I think the billings have gone back up. It wasn't a quick fix. We all are looking for more of a longer slog. So now it's time to say, okay, at what point does the crisis end? And we have to kind of get back to a trajectory of system health. System health is not provider health. It's not DDSN health. It's both our health. And so a lot of our thinking is we're looking at long-term system health factored into our decision-making process. Another factor that we can't discount is just taxpayer values. I mean, any way you cut it, we're paying for services not rendered. And it is perfectly understandable given the capitated model to do that. But at some point, you got to make intentional decisions as to you want to intentionally continue to do that if you can, And if we didn't get the 6.2 FMAP, it wouldn't be a decision. We would have to do it. We could not do it. But with the FMAP, we have a range of options as to how we want to share this revenue gap. But if we go on an extreme of covering their losses all the way to June 30th, we just have to recognize from a legislative oversight and governor perspective and taxpayer, we are basically subsidizing, we're paying for services not rendered. That is a factor. Obviously, the 6.2% FMAP, you heard Director Baker when he spoke very well at the last commission meeting. The FMAP, its intent is, FMAP is not designed specifically for COVID. Whenever there's a major recession, this is a common technique by the federal government, is to increase the FMAP, because when you have a major economic decline, what you end up having is unemployment, people get on Medicaid rolls, increased costs. So the 6.2% is not COVID specific. It is more recession or economic decline specific. So the funds should be designed to provide for additional services or additional costs. Now, part of that is retrospectively looking back to making sure your provider system stays together. They call them retainage payments. We have not entertained retainage payments. Retainage payments is to keep somebody in business. And I certainly think that's a future decision that I think Director Baker and Mary talked about, but it's not something that is immediate on the table. So the purpose of the money is system maintenance, system costs, system improvements. It is not to make everybody whole after the crisis. So that is a factor. And lastly, I think part of our decision-making process was how do we incentivize providers to have some equity in the game so that as we go forward, they are looking at their cost structures, because as long as band payments continue, just like we learned in waiver case management, you're not incentivized to adjust to some of the economic realities that we have to address to. So we felt like part of our process is how do we incentivize them to project forward and adjust their costs in a way to face July 1st, because at some point transitions end and a new norm begins. So that was part of our analysis. So when we came to our recommendation phase, we pretty much, in my opinion, took a kind of down a middle of the road model of how to come up with a plan to address all these objectives in a way that we address the crisis. And so our first point in our recommendation is for the first 7 weeks after day program closing, March 16th to April 30th, that DDSM through FMAP would cover 100% of the revenue losses, meaning that we would hold the boards harmless on any type of recoupment of services not provided. And our estimation is $5.7 million, 100% dollars, and $4.0 million FMAP.
Okay, I have a question, Pat.
Sure.
So, what do the providers do with all this money that they get when they're not using it for a service?
Well,
to provide a service, what do they do?
Like-
What is the general usage of the money?
the first caveat when you describe anything, what they do, is you have a spectrum of 40 boards, and they all don't operate like cookie cutters. They
Yeah, I
have
know.
different models, they have different management skill sets, they have different staffing patterns. Mary ran her board.
Can I tell you what I did with it?
Yeah,
I
because-
banked it. I put it in the bank. We did not use the money that was in the at-home waiver bans to cover our costs in residential. The people that we had in residential, the programs we had in residential ran inside a budget, and we did not take the money, which you could do in a capitated system. If you made a profit in those, like you didn't serve all those units of respite because they didn't need it or they didn't want it, we could have moved that over to support maybe a lot of overtime in our residential program. We didn't do that. We just lived on the budget. So we banked that money. So I would think that that board probably has a fairly healthy cash balance at this point and is running on their residential rates. If they're not, I mean, that's basically what you did when you manage. You manage your overtime, you manage everything, and then you stay within your residential rates. Some boards will use that money to cover stuff in their residential and day program, would they not?
Yeah. We surveyed the boards, and some boards made the argument that I need 100% of my day program to go into my residences to provide the day service. And what they would essentially say is their business model was on first shift, Monday through Friday, all their people went to day programs. There was no staffing there. So it wasn't like just adding a trainer. They had to add physical people to staff first shift plus the training component.
But that's during the COVID.
Okay.
Prior to that.
But that's their business model.
That's their model.
So they said it's going to cost more. Some people said it wasn't going to cost as much. So you have a whole spectrum of how it affects the residential setting. But if I had to generalize, you would say the majority of boards have some additional costs. Is that fair to say? Okay. Then you got your fixed costs. Chris did the calculation for the fixed cost for the system, which
It's
was
like 400,000 a month.
400,000.
Based on what they turned in.
What they turned in. You have two different providers. One provider has a mortgage on their day program facility. One doesn't. They have different cost structures. And then ultimately, a cost that we have to be very cognizant of is when the at-home consumers, all 3,100 of them, they may not be getting day services, but they still have access to other at-home services, and we're trying to incentivize them to get PCA, respite, and alternative services. We call them replacement services. So when they start doing more PCA respite, it's got to come from the band. So we can't take 100% of the band. We have to do something in order to cover those additional costs.
Well,
So
one of the additional costs out there that is being said, so we have to pay hazard pay for people to work with people with COVID. I understand that. I mean, you usually have to incentivize your staff to go, but we need to look at the numbers. There's only 6 providers out of all of our providers who are actively treating or working with somebody who has the virus. 6. And they're all boards. So that's
6
not
we
as
know of.
many as,
6 we know.
No, 6 that have been tested positive. We
Right.
definitely know.
6 we
Yes.
know. So
Yes. But there aren't any other people with symptoms or anything like that, because as soon as our folks get a symptom, they're going for testing. Or even before they get a symptom, because the staff might show a symptom. Because usually that's the way it happens. A staff member and then a consumer. But right now, it's really mostly in that, the Clarendon County area, the Florence area. That's where we're seeing us being hit. But you got to look at the numbers at some point. That is the number of providers that need the quote hazard pay. This also is not touching, contrary to some rumors that are out there, this is not touching an individual who has a service. So if they're already getting their PCAs coming in and their in-home supports or whatever they're getting, they're still getting that. We're not touching any of that. We're touching units that are not being delivered. So, and the band,
Which is only day program. We're not addressing units not delivered at in-home services.
Yes, because we really can't quantify that at this point. We know that adult day healthcare has closed down. So there are a lot of units not being delivered for that service. But we think that we might be having some replacement services for those. Well, we're not touching anything. No one's not going to get a service of which they need. If they're entitled to a service, they're going to get it. It's just a matter of just letting cash be out there that is not being utilized.
Okay. So first thing, Mayor, I want to say that whoever was running that board before you got onto that budget system that you just described probably, shouldn't have anything to do with our system anymore. Anybody who would let that go that long, where they were, say, spending the next month's money to pay this month's cost, whoever was the head of that particular board really should be taken out and shot, I think.
Uh-oh. How to get an execution.
Well, so no, that joke aside.
But it is.
It is. But the point I was trying for clarifying for my sake, are there any QPLs that provide day services?
Yes, their funding has been entirely cut.
Right.
Because they're on a fee for service.
Right. Okay, so that was my next question. So we did have a segment of these providers who were already on a fee for service
Right.
basis.
Less
That
than-
being the QPLs. What we're talking about solely here is the boards that were not on a fee for service, the county boards,
They're
right?
just because they get the ban.
Right,
So,
okay.
I mean, if you want to talk about the ultimate retainer
And then the
payment,
adult,
that's it.
the adult day health care too, I think you gotta consider that because it's very similar. Those
Okay.
providers have zero billing right now, and
Right.
that's about 800,000 a month that we were running for adult day health care services. And that's been obliterated. I mean, that's zero now.
And that was through QPLs, or was that through the boards, or was that?
Private providers.
Private providers
All
that
right,
are directly enrolled with Medicaid.
Right, okay. But that element doesn't affect our budget at all because again, they were just doing.
It
straight
does.
fee.
Okay.
Okay,
It's included in the band, and so if we give the board $15,000 and they don't have adult day health care, they're not getting a bill and having to pay for it, so they're
Okay.
able to pocket that difference.
okay.
Or
So
not,
there
we
is-
don't recoup it because the expense was not incurred.
Right, got it. So there is an element of where the QPLs are shut down that we're still getting a hit. Okay. All right, thank you.
I think our challenge in all this is trying to operate the bands in normal times is very challenging because we don't have the instruments or the actuarial basis to fine tune things. In the current circumstances, where now the predictable services are all haywire, and we're trying to look at non-actuarial bands, how do you split that up is truly just a lot more judgment than it is a precision decision. So once we made that I call it the look in the mirror test. After 7 weeks, you have to look taxpayers in the eye and say, are we going to keep on paying for services not rendered? And the answer was at some point, and how do we have to get to a healthy place? And so we made that, hey, 7 weeks, we got to have some, as Mary would say, titrate down a little bit. And, your titration is a function of how much money you had. Middle of last week, we had a very uncertain FMAP, and we were thinking, hey, we'll contribute 30%, providers will contribute 70%. 75% of the providers have adequate cash reserves to cover that. And those cash reserves are essentially prior band payments that have been saved. So it is, but I am sensitive that, hey, good managers get to save, you don't want to penalize them, but at the end of the day, the money in the system is the money in the system. Now that we have the FMAP at a much healthier level, we're in a position to contribute more. And the question is, where on that spectrum do we go, and why do we stop? Do we go to 100%? We take care of everything? Do we go to 40%? Do we go to 50%? And what we settled on was 50%, because there's two main reasons in my mind you guys can kick in. One is we have to leave them enough money. And again, they all have different business models, but we have to find some average that, hey, some do have increased residential costs. Some have higher fixed costs in the day programs. So some have mortgages, some don't. They have transportation savings in there. And these consumers are going to get replacement services. They're probably not going to get them right away, but I think as time goes on, that's going to go up. So we felt 50% was a very healthy number to cover these short-term costs, have adequate money in the system for the replacement services, and then we put kind of a safety net there, and that is, if for some reason they're at-home consumers, replacement services exceed the 50% we left you, we will settle up next year and we'll cover anything over 50%. So we're kind of building this safety net around them, but we have to start moving in a direction of sustainability. And the sustainability is, if we project that this was a hurricane, the sustainability, we're going back to normal. By everybody involved here, the trajectory of recovery is going to be a longer, what they call it now, a long U-shape event as opposed to a V event. And so I think there has to be some cost recognition that revenues down, costs have got to adjust to it. And they have to bring some management to bear to bring that into some level of alignment so that when we get to July 1st and the FMAP money could end on July 1st, that we're not sitting here on July 1st having spent all our FMAP money we're getting no more FMAP money, and people haven't even started to refine their operations to adjust to less revenue. So that's why we kind of kept it in the middle, so that we're equitably sharing the costs, but we're also considering taxpayers' equities. We're also considering, quite frankly, the providers' equities to, as we learned in waiver case management, the hard decisions weren't made until there was recognition that the guaranteed payment ended and that the fee-for-service model would kick in. So I think if I'm sitting in your chair, one of the biggest decisions you got to make is 50% reasonable, or do we need to go up or down the scale? I think that's a legitimate discussion and debate. And then you get into more of the details. How are we going to collect it? You can collect it a number of ways. First way we are going to collect it, Chris talked about earlier, is basically doing some analysis in the bands. There are cost numbers in the bands. I don't think the cost numbers in the bands directly reflect costs. So I think what we did, when we met with providers, they were suggesting making it based on utilization, and that is clearly, in my mind, a superior way, because if you're going to take away revenues, what you want to do is the costs in the system that are connected to the revenues need to be affected. So if you're a board with very low at-home day program, we should not take a lot from you, because we're taking funds away from you that you could be using for other at-home services. So of all the ways to collect, we came with 3 or 4, and obviously we could in our contract we could enforce the 80% rule, which we have not enforced in many years. But that's a way we could make some of these collections. We just thought that was cumbersome and kind of cause friction because we haven't done it. It's just, I think it's better to be straight up and say, hey, we're collecting it based on usage and some pro rata analysis to that. And then the last question is going to be, do we collect after the year in a recoupment? Do we spread it out over 3 payments? Do we spread it out over 2 payments? And we elected to spread it out over the last 2 payments, primarily because the May payment, by the time we got the FBAP number, the May payment was already in the barrel, and we couldn't stop it. It's going out without any reduction. So that left us 2 at the end of the year. And rather than recoup it next year, we felt like it would be better to take it from their band payment so that they could visually see and feel that there is a reduction in revenue, that they have to start thinking about reductions in reciprocal costs. And we had caveat at that, knowing that 75% of the boards have plenty of cash flow to get through the end of the year. The ones that don't, we have plenty of FMAP money to give them bridge loans in June if they so need them. Because historically in this agency, you end up with 1 payment in June 1st, and then 3 payments in July, 1st, 15th, and well, 1st of next month in a 30-day period. So even in normal years, this is a challenging cash flow for boards. And if we take some pro rata portion of this, it would make it a little bit tougher. But fortunately this year, unlike last year, we have cash that we can do short-term loans to get them through the year. So we can get everybody through the end of the year. We just want to get them through the end of the year so that on July 1st, they're postured to go forward, not counting on future FMAP money that would support them that way. And then the last reason is, and I think the biggest question I would have if I were you is, if you got anywhere from 8 to 10 million, probably Mary's 7 to 10 million, Mary's very conservative, but anywhere from 7 to 10, and you make that 2 quarters, that's 14 to 20 million. Hey, even our worst case, we can cover all the losses. The question is going to be, and it's our judgment, that we need to be fair-minded and get the system healthy, get to July 1st. But this FMAP money is, the purpose of FMAP money is to address system costs. I don't think we've seen the system costs yet outside of lost revenue. And I'll go back to what Robin said is, if we have to start designing new services, come up with Appendix K, people talk about group respite, people talk about smaller groups, who knows what kind of rates we'll get there. We may have to subsidize those rates in order to make it worthwhile. So we have a lot of unknown events July 1st. We also have to throw in that the budget that we're starting July 1st is not the $45 million increase we're looking at. It's flat. And when they come back in August or September, after coming off, hey, you just look around, but there's a good likelihood that whatever increases we thought are in jeopardy and whatever the world is at that time, the legislatures may have to project some sort of, less than a flat budget. So that's the uncertainty we're looking at. And that's why we're keeping that $14.5 million. But on top of that, we have other costs. We've made adjustments to, instead of having 30-day band, 30-day bed vacancies, we have 60-day bed vacancies. And maybe Lori can talk a little bit about it. Right now, when the normal attrition of the band is when somebody stops getting services, they might attrit out of the band, and that's fine. That's what happens, and we add somebody else. Under getting 6.2% money, we cannot let anybody out of services. Meaning, if you stop getting services, you don't attrit out, and under the band system, we'd keep on paying somebody $15,000 a year for someone who's not getting services because that's part of the agreement.
Not only that, we have all the state plan charges that person's racking
That's right.
up
That's
there
right.
in the hospital. So anybody that's a waiver consumer, even if they go to a doctor's appointment, picked up in an ambulance, go to the hospital, we have to pay that bill. So the fact that they don't come off our rolls, we're stuck paying that for that additional period of time. And we increased our intermittent vacancies from 45 to 60. Which also is a cost increase, and we're losing our ability to recoup funds that are being billed to Medicaid, but like the adult day health care scenario, that's a lost revenue. And so we don't know what all those numbers are going to add up to. Plus, we've gone up on the respite, or what is it that y'all are tracking on that spreadsheet?
The
Replacement service, yeah.
Right. And so that the replacement services are costing in excess of the cut day program services. So
If they get them. So, but ultimately, the longer time goes on, the more likely they're to find providers, and that will go up. So there are the uncertainties in front of us. So I don't think we're sitting on $14.5 million because we're greedy. And I think hopefully us here that that money is going to be in a little glass box that everybody can see. And but I think it is more prudent to have those reserves going forward than to extend the 100% to May 15th or change the percentage from 50 to 75%. It is reasonable people can make those conclusions. I just think we're trying to meet all these different objectives of a healthy system, and we found that splitting it down the middle was the right thing to do, as well as the prudent thing to do.
So when we say splitting down the middle, just to clarify a couple things, we're not splitting the whole thing down the middle because we paid for the first 7 weeks. Additionally, we instead of proposing to you that we take all the funding of the day program that we provide to providers and recoup the funding that we provide them, there's a difference between what we fund and what they bill. And that's the attendance gap that's out there. It's about $800,000 a month. We're eating that as well. So we're not talking about taking the revenue we give them. We're talking about taking the billing efficiency out of the system. So that's another part that we're incurring at DDSN and not splitting.
Hang on one second. I think Barry wants to be called on we have the spider phone here anywhere?
I don't think you can call them.
Call them.
We don't have a spider phone in here?
It's connected.
It's using-
You can't call out and.
Yeah, we have
Hey, Barry.
Hey, Barry, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's
I wrote
okay.
down tomorrow for this meeting, not now.
All right.
Sorry about that.
And also to
I don't
clarify,
know how that happened. I got to look at my seat. But anyway, where are we? Are we almost done?
No, we're still discussing the only agenda, well, the biggest agenda item. We're still talking about it. So we'd be on your page 2.
he's driving.
Oh, he's driving then, never mind.
Well, he said he was on the phone. He couldn't.
Yeah, I got my stuff with me.
Okay.
Okay.
On page 2 at
Are we on page 2 or 3?
Three.
3, page 3.
Item 4.
The top of page 3.
The other point to make, which is a really good comment that the provider network made when we met with them last week. When I initially looked at this, I was looking at all the funded band Bs and Is, how much day program money is in each band, and then recouping all that funding from providers. Well, one provider made a comment that, not everybody is using day services. So I use an exaggerated example that if you have a board A, and this isn't a true story, it's just an example. They have 100 consumers and they don't have any day program utilization. They have everyone using PCA, respite, and all these other in-home services. And we have board B, which has 100 consumers, and all they do is go to the day program. My mechanism would have pulled all the money back from board A for day services, and they still are out there incurring all these costs for in-home services. And then the board that's out there with the day program would be pocketing their funds, if you will. And so there was a built-in flaw in that model. So what I did is I actually ran utilization reports, which basically crawls into each person's budget and looks at delivered services for these 5 services plus job coach. And basically, instead of pulling funds out based on what the funding is, we actually looked at underlying day services for each consumer and each board. And that's the proposal we're making, is that it's taken from those that were actually using day services.
So that way,
These
when
folks.
the criticism is, well, you're just taking the board's funding away and they can't pay for at-home services, that's not true. We went in and actually looked at, is this person receiving day services, and this is what, they're not getting that service, we're taking that. Now, we're only taking we're proposing 50% of it. So if they get a in-home support or they decide they're going to get some respite, there's still 50% of that band money sitting there for them to utilize.
Okay.
And if it goes over that,
It'll be more than 50% of the
right,
band,
that's true.
actually.
That's true.
It's a
Yeah,
good
because
bit
we're
more
still
than-
looking at day program
Yeah,
only,
yeah.
and that's only a certain dollar amount. So they're between what's left over in their band.
60 to 70% of the
Yes,
band left.
they'll have plenty of band to get that. And if not, by some fluke, they go over that, we would actually have the cash to help reimburse them. The biggest thing is last year, we had to help 3 boards make it to the finish line. And we weren't sure we were going to make it to the finish line. So this year, we're a little healthier. Now we've got this.
We think.
Well, no, this year we actually thought we were a little healthier and going to be getting a nice budget increase to boot. And that's not going to happen. So this FMAP money is to keep the system alive so we can help. We can fill those gaps when they happen. But the gaps that happen, they're happening every time we go into a board when they're having financial difficulties. It's not because the rate isn't good enough for them. It's because they're not managing it properly. And we're able to identify, Chris's team gets in there and literally, that's what's really nice about having people who are used to working in the field. They go in there and they analyze, what are you doing? Why do you have so much staff at your day program? Your ratios are too high. Your staffing is not correct. And once you get all that stuff fixed, all they need is that, let's scooch up the payments a little bit, and then they can go on from there. They can manage it correctly. But it's usually a management problem, not a rate problem. And if we can help fix that, that's really important because it provides stability going forward. It doesn't take much to do it either.
So, quick question. Under the plan as we're talking about it right now, for those QPLs that we talked about a second ago that have completely shut down, they're not going to get any part of the 8 weeks that we would cover, the March 16th, the 7 weeks that we would cover it, the March 16th, April 30th segment. They're not going to get any of the fit. I mean, is any of that going to be translated to those folks?
All right. We have QPLs who build day program, like UCP is a day program provider. They're
Right.
providing day services in their residential program. So they will get paid for those
It's in their
services.
residential rate.
It's in their residential rate anyway. So thank goodness. We've got places like York and Richmond up in York that provide the day program, not just the adult day healthcare, but they provide day program.
Right.
They were to get a 20% vacancy payment that's in a contract that they have. So a couple of these providers, and how many do we have?
Honestly, them and like PEP,
I think there's like 2 or 3.
right, there was ECM, but they are
Okay.
gone to the.
I think we're talking about 2 providers. And we had written a retainer payment into the K for day program providers, not for the boards, because they got the band,
Right.
but for those that are private pay, that we would try to keep them in the business
Right. I just want to keep the
going
doors
forward, right?
open. Right. I got you.
But,
Okay.
so at this point, that is still something, if we talk retainer payments, that's who we were talking about the payment for.
Okay.
We were only talking about it for private provider to keep a viable provider after it's all said and done.
And of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, as private providers, they could have accessed some of this PPP money as well.
They
right?
can, well,
Right.
yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, they started, our staff studied other states' retainer payments, and when I was looking at their results, pretty much every single state limited their retainer payment to 30 days. So that's well less than 7 weeks or anything else we're talking about here.
Okay.
And they are in a fee-for-service environment. They are not in a band system.
Right. And again, the only reason I'm asking this question is we have this weird duality, and you know, me, I'm always sort of good for the goose, good for the gander. I want to make sure that we're at least trying to be equitable across the providers, regardless of whether they are a board or a private. I want to make sure that we're making sure that we acknowledge that difference exists. And it sounds like we have done that.
Yeah, they're all getting, we're leaving
Okay.
the residential, and there's not many private day program providers.
Yeah, I know we're talking a small chunk here, but that small chunk would be the source of a lot of complaints of unfairness, right? Potentially. And again, if we were doing anything for them, justifiably so. And
Right, and it would have to be built into the K. We can't just
Right.
give somebody a retainer payment
Right.
on our.
right,
So-
right. I understand.
And Director Baker is not against retainer payments. It's a matter of, if this thing's going for a couple, we're done, then why do we do that? But financing, he calls it financing, which is what a retainer would be, is more down if this thing goes on longer. And they can be retroactive. And we're going to be looking at that if we need a K amendment. And you are allowed to make those. You can. I think I listened to Colorado, they're on their 4th. So, you give it your best go and let it go, and then you see how things progress down the road. But, so we're not, that's not something that's not on the drawing board, it's there. But it's for very few providers.
There's 2 things about this program that about this proposal that I don't think should be, and we haven't gotten to the second one yet, but the first one I think we're past, and I'm so sorry that I was not here. Truly I am. But I'm not understanding why we are giving the providers a pass on the first 7 weeks of this of this situation. Why are we not splitting it with them for the entire time instead of just for the next 7 weeks? There's no reason I don't see a reason why they should be treated like nothing happened for the first 6 weeks.
Well, my opinion on that is, so if you go back and think back of how this thing unraveled, I remember we had a trainer scheduled for April 1st to come in and do training for our finance directors, and you're thinking, how's that relevant? I thought by April 1st, we were going to be back to where I could still hold this training. We were told by the end of March, that we should be back open, okay? So if I'm a provider, I'm not going to start terminating staff, furloughing staff, restructuring my operations when I don't know what the future looks like. So in my opinion, if we don't stay at May 1st and we want to go back to March 16th, the past practice DDSN has had is we have allowed providers to adjust their minimum and maximum unit expectations as it relates to the 80% contract. We've done that for 20 years. I mean, well, back to 89 when this started, or somewhere around then. But anyways, my point is we would end up forgiving it anyways because we have historically provided providers with an adjustment to their 80% attendance rules. So if I was an executive director and I was sitting out there, I feel like my hands were tied, honestly, as an operational leader for at least the first 3 weeks. So we could discuss, I mean, we can discuss all of it, but I'm just saying, you know, definitely the first 3 or 4 weeks, I don't think there was enough information available to expect them to have adjusted operations at that point. That's my approach to it.
Well, maybe not, but it's not 7 weeks, I can tell you that. I mean, it's no more than 2 or 3. And the point of this is, if they need a loan at some point, nobody wants any providers to go out of business, the governor or nobody else. But the point is, they can get a loan from us if they need it down the road. Their money is meant to be spent on, just like our money is meant to be spent on this situation. And we need to keep as much of this as we can for, I'll talk about this when we get further down, be keeping as much of this money as we can for problems that we're going to have next year. This pandemic is not going to, all the doctors are saying this is coming back in the fall. And so we've got to keep money in case that kind of thing happens, to where we can have a cushion of sorts.
Well,
I mean,
Barry, if I may, one of the other things that we have to consider is that when we wrote the Appendix K, we put in opportunities for people to swap out services, so that if we go too deep into it, we're just going to have to back it in anyway. And we're in a band system. We're not saying that it's the right system. We've been saying for a very long time, we've got to get out of the band system. And this shows you why we have to get out of it. But be that as it may, this is the current system. So we're trying to do the best we can and be good stewards of the money, given the hand we are dealt. And trying to be equitable, understanding there might be additional residential costs for some providers, because they have to care for people who are sick, and they have to run a first shift that they were not staffed for originally. Now, there are other providers that are staffed for the first shift. So it really is provider by provider. So when you're trying to make a policy that's going to be covering all providers, you kind of have to do the best you can with what you got. But I think you're right that this shines a light on the reason why going fee for service with this stuff is much better going forward, because then you pay for what you get, and you're not just putting money out of the street hoping that you get what you paid for.
Yeah, we also,
that's the subject for after June 30th. I'm talking about before June 30th now. But I mean, you can still recoup the money based on the fact they aren't 80% occupied. And if you had to unrecoup it, meaning give them a loan, that's another story. But at least then you would know you were going to get it back. This way, you're never going to get it back because you're just giving it out, and you're hoping that we have the money in 6 months or 8 months. See, I'm under the impression this is not going to go away in the next couple of months. I'm under the impression this is coming back, and we're going to have more trouble. And I don't think that they're going to be as kind toward this, extra money that we're getting from PPI and all that stuff down the road, because it's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be bad enough for another state of emergency, but it's going to create more issues. And if it does, we're going to have to be able to. We're going to be the ones that's going to need to protect the people that we serve more than the providers, because we're the ones that's got to make sure that none of this affects the people that we serve. It might affect the providers, but it doesn't make sure it's served. And those are different things.
Well, that is certainly something we can put up to the committee to vote on, that you think you want to go back 7 weeks, we can, that could be one of the options.
That time, at least go back, at least give them 2 or 3 weeks and go back to from 7 to 3 or 4. I mean, you know, give them a few weeks like Chris was just talking about, but don't give them all 7.
I think that could be an option that you can put out there as a motion for them to vote on.
Argument.
And Barry, is the issue for you the word forgiveness that's been proposed in terms of the hold harmless? Because one thing we have to look at when you talk about recoup, I mean, some of this money has already been paid out, right? The March payments and the April payments have already gone out. So we're talking about recouping those funds essentially at this point in time. Would the concern be addressed as opposed to using the language under the recommended plan of action of holding them harmless, as just changing that language to something else that still reserves the right to recoup in the event that the financial situation becomes such that we can no longer do that? I mean, because otherwise, one of the things we have to look at when we talk about how we're getting money back is, we address that, how are we recouping this money? Because some of the boards are going to have the reserves that we go in and we say, okay, we want this money back. Some of them just aren't. I mean, we got 5 that have less than $100,000. They're not going to have the funds to give back at all. So I'm kind of wondering whether that might address your concern. I don't know to what extent you can hear me, Barry. I know it's coming over the phone, so I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Barry?
Barry, can you hear me at all?
Maybe he dropped.
Did we lose? I'm not seeing anybody except you at this point in time, Robin. Did we lose?
Oh, yeah. I see 3.
I see it's you, me, and Mark, but I don't see the room.
The conference room?
Yeah.
And yeah. So
I think we might have lost the room. Yeah.
We lost the room, which is why we lost Barry, because they were calling through the room to Barry.
Right.
So, I think that's why. Let me text Mark. I mean, I'm sure he probably knows.
All right, I'll call Mary while you're doing that.
Okay.
Mark said he just tried to call the room. He's ahead of us.
Okay.
I guess he's just muted. He can still hear our complaining.
Yeah, and this is still being recorded.
Right.
I think we're formally still okay.
Right. Yeah, we're still in session. It's still being recorded. We just lost the element of the room.
Make sure.
And I don't think we want to hit stop broadcast because that'll eliminate everything. Okay, he's saying network issue. All right, he's calling Pat, so we'll go from there.
Okay.
Mary just sent me a text that they lost internet.
Yeah, I just saw that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You there, Mark?
Yes, we can see you guys now.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We're having internet problems.
I want to give a minute for folks in TV land to reconnect, but they may have been fine.
They were
Yeah, but we
all-
have a lot of people.
Yeah, Robin and I were fine. It was just you guys.
Everybody heard you two talking.
Right, and we made it very clear that the broadcast was still going out live.
That was safe.
Okay.
So I don't know to what extent you guys heard what I was saying, and I don't know to what extent Barry heard it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't hear anything.
So going back to what I was saying earlier in response, and can Barry hear me? That was my first question.
Barry?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
My only question is, did you hear what I said?
I heard everything you said in terms of your concerns about whether it's 7 weeks or whether we should cut that back to 2 weeks, essentially to what extent that we're doing that because of your concerns about the long-term need for the FMAP funds. So I think I heard everything about that. And
That's the main thing, yeah.
so one of my concern or my question was, is your concern, Barry, about the language in the recommended plan of action, paragraph 1, where we use the word hold harmless? Because you had talked about the ability to recoup funds in the event that we didn't have the ability to recoup these funds if down the road the crisis extended out, we were in a financial bind and needed to go back and get those funds. So my question was sort of the twofold one of, obviously the mechanism for recoupment is something that we'd have to discuss, but is ultimately potentially your issue resolved if we remove the language of hold harmless, putting on my lawyer hat, and substituting some additional language of at this time not seeking recoupment on those funds, but reserving in the event of an emergency, making it a little bit less of an absolute forgiveness and more of a conditional forgiveness for the money that's already gone out. Because that's basically what we're talking about here. We've already sent out the March payment. We've already sent out 2 payments in April. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about money that we've already gone out, whether we can reach out and grab that money back. So that way we're sort of pushing and we're kicking it down the road. But in the event that we don't run into a financial crisis, then we can then say, okay, we're going to go back and say that conditional forgiveness is now completely hold harmless, or, oh, by the way, guys, we're now, in January of 2022, and we need to address this somehow because the financial implications have gone farther. So my question to you, Barry, is this a question of the words hold harmless being an issue more than anything?
Well, that is part of it. But what you just said about us recouping the money down the road is exactly what I was going to say at the end of this matter, which is where we talk about that we are going to forgive all of the talk about at the end of this, where we say we're going to forgive we're not going to recoup any of the money, prior to this. I mean, we're not going to recoup any of the money that we could have recouped for the 80%.
80% rule, yeah.
That's where I was going to say that may or may not be depending on what our situation is in 2020, because we don't want to take that off the table whenever we may have to do it. The point is, it's not. Y'all know how I am about trying to save money, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do here is understand that we may have to protect the people that our actual clients by not allowing this to affect them. It's much better for this to affect the providers than it is for the problem to affect the actual people that we serve. And the only way we can be sure it doesn't is to keep enough money so that we can give a loan or something else to the providers if we need to. Now, if you want to compromise, then I would be willing to say that we would say we would not hold you harmless. We may or may not hold you harmless based on what happened in the first quarter of 2020, but certainly need to say that. We do not need to say that we are forever going to hold you harmless for all this 7 weeks, because it is not proper for us to act like nothing happened in April and in March and April. It is not. It's not feasible. It's not financially proper, because it did happen, and they need to share the burden with us. And I realize we're getting more money from PrEP, but we've got to keep next year in mind. And we can always give money back later. We can always add money to it. We can't always take money back. We can always give loans. There's lots of things we can do if we have money. But if we don't have money, the money's going. The money's going. That's just my opinion. I really believe we should at least split that to say, instead of saying 7 weeks, we should at least say that for the last 3 or 4 weeks, you all have to pay us back, is what I think. But I mean, I'm willing to compromise and however y'all want to, but we cannot say we're going to hold them harmless for 7 weeks. That is, I don't think. And I mean, I'm asking that we not do that, and I'm asking that we do something different than that.
I have a question. What happens if we go negative? I know it's the legislators have indicated that we can't do that as an agency. We can't go negative. What happens if that happens? Our budget goes negative.
What I've been told is that basically the C-suite will be cleared out. They will basically terminate the entire executive staff and start over. That's what I've been told. I mean, we can go to the legislative.
It's possible.
We can go to the legislative folks.
Possible. It's also possible they would take over and allow some other agency to come in and run the thing until they figured out what else they were going to do.
No, we can, as long as we have a good enough reason and we're in front of it and talk to the legislators, I understand that approach would change, but they'd have to agree that it was not egregious or mismanagement on our part.
Uncontrollable.
Yeah. But that's what I've been told by several people when I've talked about how close we were to zero last year.
And the year before.
So I certainly didn't want to have my head on a stick.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't care. I mean, yeah, you're just giving fodder to people who want to change anything here anyway. I don't think that ultimately, I don't think that that's something that's going to happen. I think that we can manage through this. We managed last year and we were in really tight straits and we managed it. We'll manage it this year. But I understand what Barry's saying. We do need to look towards next year because they are definitely going to, I believe there's going to be some cuts. If we think, and again, if there's not any cuts, I will be so happy and so surprised. But the fact that you've gone down from having lots of revenue to having no revenue for 3 months, we got a problem. And so I think if we don't prepare for that, that's wrong. But the providers do provide the service. I am well aware of that. We need to pay for the service that is provided. If they have additional costs in residential programs, I think what we've left on the table should be enough to cover that. But the truth of the matter is, going forward, and this is not something that I haven't said before, probably more than one time, I do tend to repeat myself when we talk about these bans, that programs are going to have to start to manage their budgets based on what they get for the services, the individuals they have. So if I've got a house with 2 Gs and an H band in it, or 2 H bands and 2 G bands, I've got to manage my budget for that home on the money that's coming in. And I think that right now we're not saying fee for service for residential. We're keeping those rates where they are. We're moving that off to the side. We are trying just to take back a very small slice so we don't interfere with at-home supports. I know I'm getting accused of pulling back at-home supports for people without telling them, but that's not the truth. We're not doing that.
It's actually the opposite.
We're going in there and we're pulling back supports that aren't being provided and leaving our best recommendation. And I know, Barry, that you probably don't agree with me, but my best recommendation is 50%. After the meeting and hearing about the FMAP, we changed 2 things from the provider meeting. One was we said we were going to leave them 30% and we were taking back our portion of it. We were leaving them our match and we were taking it back the 70%. And we were also we switched the way we were doing the calculation. We went from an aggregate or an averaging kind of calculation to let's get in and use utilization so we don't touch any at-home stuff and we don't penalize a board who has more at-home services versus day program services, because that's definitely the way some counties are built. So that is something that is completely different than what DDSN has usually done in the past. It's usually all been about averages. So we're trying to go back where the money is sitting. But those are the 2 things that changed. So we changed our methodology and we went from 30% to 50%. And that was after talking to providers and then getting more information about what our FMAP was. So I stick with our recommendation. I understand Barry's concern. I think we will be okay over the
Yeah.
through the fiscal year. And I think it would give us a little bit of a cushion going into next year.
I'm not suggesting we don't do 50%. I'm just suggesting what I suggested. I'm not suggesting 50% is a long thing.
Let me just add one thing.
Because we're actually talking about, if I'm not wrong, we're actually talking about, I'm not suggesting we don't pay anybody for services that are provided. What I'm suggesting is that we don't pay half the money for services that were never provided. And, well, what I'm suggesting is, I'm not even suggesting that. I am suggesting we pay half the money for services that were never provided, which is another matter. But what I am suggesting is that we should not allow them to get away with like nothing happened for the first 7 weeks.
I think the amount of money we're discussing is between $1 and $1.25 million is the difference between what you're proposing and what we proposed, just so you have a number. That's a rough estimate, just doing math in my head real quick. That can be dangerous.
So we're not talking a huge amount of money.
Well, $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon you got some real money.
I just want everybody to,
I know, but $1
Just want
million
everybody to
to
know.
us is a little bit different than $1 million to the providers. Because the lower down you get on that food chain, the more that dollar means.
But
So
you also said that, or Chris did, I think, that we only have $1 million in the bank right now, or projected.
not right now. We were projecting, prior to COVID hitting, we were looking at between $1.5 million and $1.5 million in reserves at year end. And of course, the margin of error is very, very small. So, I mean, there was no predicting that being the actual number. But no, that's not our current state. And even with the FMAP, that wouldn't be our projected state.
Yeah.
Right.
The other argument I would make, and I'm not,
And also, one other thing to mention is, isn't it true that the FRAP would change if they change the amount of time that we're under a state of emergency? Isn't that FRAP money, considering that we're staying through a state of emergency through the end of the year?
through the end of June, it's on a per quarter basis.
Right.
So we're guaranteed the money that we've mentioned in the memo you got. So the document you have. The question would be if it extends to July 1st, and this is a CMS decision, not the governor's, we would then get another $8 or $10 million for the following quarter.
Right, because that was part of the Families First Act, right? They put that in there, and
Yes, that's
they
the
guaranteed it back to January.
coronavirus.
So like, even if you were, even if the declaration goes into a few days into the quarter, you get the whole quarter.
Right.
So.
The other point I would like to make, and I'm fine with whatever the committee decides, of course, but I would make an argument that to the extent we harm our provider network, we harm our consumers and the services they receive. So
I don't think.
to make a comment that, ultimately it's about serving them, I agree. And that's one of the reasons we've decided to suggest what we're suggesting, is because a viable, healthy provider network means provider services that are of value to our consumers. When you start cutting into these folks and they don't have money, they start making decisions that impact services, and they may not have staff levels, they may not be replacing vehicles, they may not be maintaining homes. So I would make an argument that actually taking more money from the providers does more harm to the provider consumers than good. That's just my personal opinion of it.
And the other element here, Barry, and I know one thing you mentioned is provided, we have to have the money in case something happens to be able to, down the road, to provide them bridge funds or loans or whatever, however you want to describe it. Ultimately, it's sort of a question of, are we doing that up front or are we doing that at the end? I mean, if we don't give them this money now, essentially, which is what we're doing, and that's what the FMAP funds are there for, though. I mean, that's like, that's the reason why we were given emergency funds, was to make that kind of bridge that wouldn't normally exist. But what's the difference between essentially viewing it that way as a loan up front when the crisis hit, and I'm not going to blame them for this. I mean, they didn't do anything wrong about it. They were hit blindsided and had to adapt on the fly just like everybody else did. I mean, in my business, it went from normal business on Wednesday and Thursday, everything came down like a guillotine. It ended. My business it still ended. So, I mean, I don't see a difference between viewing this as the money that we're giving them now up front versus 6 months from now giving them a loan, right? What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that the difference to me is that we don't know if we'll have to give it to them down the road, but if we did, we'd have it to do it. But the biggest difference is that we could make sure that the money that they were, we could be more sure that the money they were spending was in the way that we thought it should be spent, as opposed to just going on as normal, like everything was normal when it's not, because everybody has to watch what they're spending when it's not normal. And so we would be allowing ourselves leeway. The whole point is we're allowing ourselves leeway as an agency, as opposed to just handing the money over. But I'm not suggesting that we want any people to close. That's not what I'm suggesting. But you really are giving people 50% of the money for not providing services is what you're doing. And I'm not even saying I'm opposed to that. I'm just saying that I'm just not wanting to give it to them as long for as much as, because if you give it to them for the 7 weeks, then you're giving it to them at 80%, like nothing ever happened. And anyway, I've already said it.
Well, there's another way to look at this
But it
too.
does matter whether you give it to them now or later, loans, because it gives us the leeway to do it if we want to. If we don't have to, we don't want to. But if we've already given them the money and the money's gone, then we don't have it anymore, and we can't decide what we're going to do because we've already decided.
Well, in a sense, the money's already gone, though. I mean, the money that we're talking about here on the forgiveness, the March to April money has already gone out, right? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that.
No, it's already gone
So
out.
it's already out the door. It's just a question about whether we are in some manner recouping that money, getting that money back at this stage.
Can we at least say? Can we at least say that we may have to get it back if we need to, and we don't know right now if we need to or not? Instead of just saying we're holding them harmless, can we at least do that?
Yeah, I think that gives us flexibility. That was why my question held up. I mean,
and so I'll go back to that. If I can't get anywhere else, then at least let's go back to saying and also not only on that, but on the rest of the recruitment at the end of this thing too. In other words, there's another part in here that says, I have to look at the sheet. I'm looking at the sheet now, but there's another part in here that says that we are forgiving. We're not going to recoup any money. Under
You're talking about the $2.5 million attendance payback through February 2020 that we've estimated?
The 80%.
He's saying that you're committed to not.
That's right. The money that through February of 2020 that we estimated. That's right. It says in here we're not going to recoup any of that money. So can we at least say that we might have to, depending on how things go? And let's don't just take it off the table. Let's at least leave it on the table so we can decide if we need to later.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
What number is that on this document? What page, what number is that document?
It is number 4 on page 3.
Okay, thanks.
We just said that we weren't going to, fiscal year 2020, we weren't going back and looking at yeah,
Which we haven't done.
for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's kind
That's
of.
right. We said we were not going to recoup for the last couple of years. And what I'm saying is, can't we at least say that we might recoup based on what's going on? We're not saying we're not going to. Can we at least say we may have to do that based on what's happening at that time?
That, we just,
Or in 2020.
again, we just laid out what we thought was the best path to take. That is your decision. As
We're just negotiating this out, is all we're doing as a committee.
Yeah.
you guys need to talk about that.
Barry, let me add one thing just to give a perspective, and that is this agency has not done a really good job at maintaining rates for providers. The Mercer report said that they're 20% under where they should be. This agency has met revenue needs by literally cannibalizing the band system, the 80% rule. Okay, that went by the wayside so that we could leave more money with the providers because we weren't doing our job to get them the rates. So we're kind of in this double predicament of, I think their rates have been trailing. I think the band system has been cannibalized. I don't think we can actually enforce something that hasn't been enforced for 5 or 6 years. That would be unfair. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to this fee-for-service world so that we have a clean break with all this baggage of the past, and we can have a fair transaction. So conceptually, I agree 100% with you, Barry, that this has to be a arm's length business transaction to run. The problem is, in the last 2 or 3 years, we have actually, because of the structural deficits we have, is we've been giving out a lot of broccoli in the last couple of years. And the providers looking at us like, hey, what's going on up there? You know, why are you guys being, you know, we used to get things differently. And we have to, as a system, have to go forward. So, you know, my calculation personally was, hey, I kind of agree with you, Barry, conceptually, but from a practical standpoint, I'm sitting on $15 million and I'm going to bang on them for 2 more months. I don't know if that's the goodwill that we need at this point in time to move forward. So I think somewhere in there is probably economically, I agree with you, but from a system perspective, you know, one team, one fight. I think I'd rather leave them a little bit more money during these tight times. But I can see your perspective. All I'm saying is we kind of landed in the middle because our middle proposal 3 years ago would have been considered a crazy proposal, because 3 years ago there would have been an expectation that we pay this whole thing, regardless of the economic impact, because that was kind of the whole mindset here was just pay the providers. And I'm all for keeping money on the front line, but we've done it to the of a healthy DDSN. So this is a time where I think we can actually, for once, can do both. We can find that middle ground, but at the same time, be reserved enough to say, hey, these are the cash reserves going forward, and there is an end to this transition. It's called July 1st. So we're trying to bring the team along with us.
We haven't gotten to July 1st yet, have we? We're not talking about what we're doing as of July 1st yet, are we?
Well, I think this plan here ends on July 1st, and I don't think there's much expectation that any, you know, going after July 1st, there's some expectation that they've adjusted their cost structure so that any type of supplements go away. So it's really just a transition.
So we're gonna discuss then as of July 1st, basically going to fee for service, where we actually only pay for the services provided. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not.
4-day program and in-home services only, not residential.
Looking at those banshees.
I'm talking about day program.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
that's a strong possibility.
Well, then, if that were the case, then I would feel better about saying that you don't have to give it, that they don't have to do anything, that we're not going to give it back. And I would feel better about at least saying that we may or may not on that first 7 weeks, because there is, I mean, I know y'all don't look at things the way taxpayers do, but I believe that taxpayers would not want to pay for 7 weeks like nothing happened when in reality it did. And I know I'm the only one. I know that I'm not that looks at that more than others, but I'm just saying, if you look at it from a realistic perspective, you wouldn't do that. But at least we can say that we might be able to take it back. If we can at least go back to what the chairman said about bringing it back to where we say we don't hold you harmless, but we may or may not come back for at least that 7 weeks, which is $1 million, which matters to me. It may not matter to somebody else on here, but it does to me. And at least that would at least say we could if we wanted to. And the other thing is, we could say that we were going to fee for service from then on, which is exactly what we need to do. And then we've really done the right thing. Because people should be every person on every provider should be compensated heavily for what they provide, but they should not be compensated for what they do not provide. In my opinion.
I think a caution about putting something out there about the potential of going back and recoupment is that we're in a situation where the service delivery is going to have to change in the coming months because of this thing coming back in a U-shaped curve versus going right back to business as usual. And I think that providers I think it's very difficult for providers to operate in the world of might, right? We might take it back, or, we could take this back, we couldn't take that back. I really think in order for providers to jump into a new way of delivering services and the idea of replacement services for people that used to go to day programs every day, we need to kind of give them a clear indication of what their funding is going to be. That's just, we need to think about that.
Look, we all know the system's got to change. Unfortunately, every time we start down the change road, we hit a headwind, whether that headwind is in the form of a hurricane, and now the headwind's in the form of a pandemic. But this little disaster we have right now is shining the light on the fact that when you do have all the money going out to the providers prospectively, that if their billing does not occur, it truly affects this agency. We knew it before. We know that our rates are incorrect. We know that we don't get it. We're losing money in residential services. We're losing money in the day program services because of the lack of attendance. So this is just shining a brighter light on a problem we already have and we've already discussed. It's just at this point, another wrench in the works is the fact that the FMAP changed, which is going to give us some temporary relief from how much of our match we have to put forward, but it is all based on how much we bill. So I know that my fellows in the room want to say it's this much money. I'm not happy to say what kind of money it is until I see the money. And I have not seen the money. It's just, I'm cautious when it comes to talking about this stuff, because my biggest issue right now, I know what the residential billing is going to be, pretty much know that, but we're expending more money because we're holding vacancies longer. I know what my residential day program money is going to be. What I do not know is how much utilization we're going to have in the in-home supports. I don't know if that's going to go up or it's going to go down. It's not going to go down because we're cutting service. It's going to go down because people are afraid to go in other people's homes. I don't have a PCA because they can't find someone who's willing to come in. But I have a speech therapist who has no problem coming into our house twice a week. So it really depends on the person providing the services and the families. We have families in early intervention, even though they have the ability to be on a video conference with their EI now, they won't do that either. So you've got like 300 families who are just saying, no, come get me when this is all over. And then, so there's so much unknown out there as to what we're gonna see in our billings, and we're not gonna know till, what's the date that we see the stuff? Guys, help me here.
40 days after.
40 days after the fact?
Right.
Yeah, so we're still out. We still don't know what that number's gonna be.
You've seen March.
So.
Yeah, March's numbers we ran.
But that's
today.
2 weeks in and 2 weeks out.
We just got the numbers. Thank you to Ben Orner for running this. Our in-home services were down about 1.7 million. And if you factor in the number of days, and the fact that March was only half of March.
Half COVID month.
And so 1.2 million was the at-home services impact in March, but there's variation every month anyway, so it's hard to know how to attribute that.
Yeah, I don't think
We
those
won't
first,
see April until May.
and I don't think those first 2 weeks are going to tell us a whole lot because everybody at that point in time was just struggling with,
That's
we're
right.
just going to be
Right.
locked down. There hadn't been any trends. I mean, we were still coming to terms with how is business going to go forward.
Right,
So
and now
I
we
think the
also
utility
have-
of that information, unfortunately, is limited as a predictive model.
And we also have the in-home supports. Now it's a replacement service for folks that are in day services or even getting PCA, that their family, even a legal guardian, can be the in-home supports provider for that child or for that adult or for that husband or wife in the Haskell waiver. So how is that going to impact us? Because we have waived all the, I mean, you don't need to do a background check on yourself if you're the mama of the child. I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. So we've waived a lot of those things, so they're going to be able to get on the rolls a lot quicker. And it's a replacement service. So the only way we can kind of monitor how much is used is you can't have more than what you're already getting. But here we go from not using any to using more. So I don't want to take back the money from the providers that I think is going to get thrown back into the game. So I think that I think this is the fairest way to do this. I think it's unfair of providers to say, give me all of it. I want all of it. And then I also think it's unfair of us to say, I'm going to take it all back because you're not using it all. I think that this is a nice down the middle kind of shot to say we're sticking to one service, not the other in-home support services, just this small piece of that pie. And we are targeting utilization, which is very fair to providers who have large in-home support programs, but very small day programs. And this is our recommendation. So you can also decide to do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, 100% credit to you guys for putting this together. I mean, this is a well thought out, comprehensive plan. I don't think there's anybody who's criticizing the work that's gone into this, and I think we understand exactly where you're coming from. I think we as a commission, and a lot of what you said, Mary, of not knowing goes back to that question of what we're basically debating right now is flexibility versus certainty, right? Are we going to prioritize certainty on the part of the boards? I think that was Lori's point. I think that was Lori who said that. I can't really see who's in the background. Certainty on the part of the boards versus a certain level of flexibility that we have to maintain from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. And again, those are competing interests, like the four competing interests. I think it falls under that Pat outlined earlier, Barry, that we were trying to balance out of where our responsibility comes from. And that's so. Again, don't take the debate, at least from my standpoint. I probably shouldn't speak for Robin and Barry, but it's just we've got strong competing interests here, and we're trying to figure out the best way that we can do it as a commission.
I understand.
Yeah, agree.
I'm not criticizing the plan whatsoever. I'm just saying that we need to modify it, in my opinion.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. And that's what committee meetings are for, is to negotiate things out.
Right.
Because if we weren't going to say anything except okay, then there would be no reason to have a meeting.
That's not what we want from our commission. You need to
Appreciate
discuss, but ultimately you're going to have to come to a consensus and then a vote. So,
Correct.
So you put your thoughts out there on the table and you debate and then you make a decision.
And from a staff standpoint, are you looking for us to have a vote on this in committee to make a recommendation to the commission as a whole?
Yes.
Okay.
And would we wait for our commission meeting in late May, or would we have to?
I'm almost inclined to do that because I'll be honest with you. This is one that it had such long-term ramifications. I don't. If I was in Lori and David's shoes, they need. I don't know if we can get them to watch this essentially or something, but I mean, this is a tricky one to make a decision on. I wouldn't want to be in there. She's sort of making a decision without knowing the whole of the debate that went back and forth.
Let's have the city to change to mid-May,
Yeah, so you're
way before the next
Good.
commission. Fair enough. 6.
We can call a special board meeting.
That's after.
If we're going to adjust, under our current plan, if we're going to adjust the mid-May payment, we'd have to have an answer like Chris is getting it now, 6th, 7th, or 8th, to give us time to rejuggle the numbers and get them out there by mid-May. And obviously, we can work with schedules, but we need that decision to make our plan work.
Right.
So I think we would be thinking about a special commission meeting on this
I
topic.
was not thinking about waiting to the end of May. We needed a
Okay,
special.
so,
meeting.
yeah, I mean, right, because I mean, it's not like, even if we voted in committee now. Yeah.
Why don't we just move the commission meeting up?
We have to have
Or, I
answer by
mean, and the other issue being that we spent nearly 2 hours just in subcommittee with just 3 of us talking about this one issue right now. So,
We need to have an answer by the 10th.
okay. So even under the best of circumstances, it stands right now, even if we had no debate within the subcommittee, we need to do something with regard to the full commission, because we're not going to have a meeting before the 10th.
Well, we would have to do a special called meeting.
Right. Not normal. Right. Okay. So I mean, we're looking at that anyway, regardless of what the recommendation is that comes out of the subcommittee right now.
Yeah.
Unless the recommendation is to do nothing.
Well, I don't
I would recommend that recommendation.
Yeah, I don't think there's. I mean, doing nothing is still making a choice.
Nobody wants to do nothing.
Okay, just want to make sure. But that's the only way you get out from having a meeting before the 10th.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So.
That might have been what they'd have done 5 years ago.
Yeah, we got, it's unfortunate, but we've got to be responsible. And again, as long as there aren't people losing services, that's not what this is about. And we do not think that this is going to put any provider underwater. We're monitoring that too, much more closely than we used to. So, and we have plans to be able to help them not be underwater. So, but we can't help anybody if we're drowning ourselves. So that's just,
Exactly, that's my point.
So.
Yeah.
So much better coming from you, Mary. That's right.
I mean, and that's, again, there's not a specific answer that we've got here, unfortunately. It's just, there's no right answer. It's just where you're balancing out the various competing interests at this stage.
Have we spent time talking about the problem 2 analysis? I don't think we have we? Should we go there now, or do we need to make a decision? Or
We've talked all around it. I can sum it up very quickly, which is basically
Okay.
everything we talked about here gets us to June 30th.
Okay.
And on July 1st of next year, we start a new system. And in order to move from our current system to something else, our current system, basically, we start building those contracts May 1st. Okay, we know we're not going to do that because the challenge of staying, nobody's a fan of the band system. But in order to change systems, you want to minimize any type of destabilizing the system, because some providers are better off than others under it. And so it was always waiting for an increase in the system. But now, given the events of COVID-19, we've already destabilized the system. We've destabilized the system because day program units, under any scenario, are going to be very problematic to predict what's going to happen next year. We have the at-home world, which could be problematic to predict. So the whole predicate of the band system is to predict, give you money, of what you spend, we get revenue, and it all works out. Well, if we can't predict it, we're going to have the same discussion next year every 2 weeks. Do we give them too much? Do we didn't give them too much? How do we balance it? So we've got to address that issue with either modifying something in the bands, which is a whole nother exercise, or fee-for-service is on the table. And what gives us reason fee-for-service to really strongly consider is 2 or 3 years ago, providers, there was enough cash in these at-home bands. Nobody really liked the mechanics of them, but it generated extra revenue for the providers to then use in other services. They made it more comfortable. But over the last 3 years, at-home services have really skyrocketed. And so whatever cushions in those bands have been squeezed down. And if you took a poll of the 39 boards, you might have half of them feel like, hey, I'm losing money on these bands, take them back. The other half might say, well, I'm probably still getting something out of it, not so fast, right?
Yep.
So, but from a system-wide, it's probably a net zero, but look at all the friction we cause with all this extra math and logistics and agitation, when in fact, if you went to a fee-for-service model, kind of like Barry said, I think what we'll learn in waiver case management, I think you're going to unleash, the animal spirits of you will earn more if you serve more. And we've learned that in waiver case management, how that solved itself. I think the rate was still tough, but they overcame, they've adjusted. Hopefully we won't have those type of rates, but at the same time, it makes the pie bigger. I think that's what fee-for-service will do for everybody. So I think we have to give a strong consideration. I think there's a lot of risk. It's too premature to decide today, but we got to do something. We can't, status quo ain't going to work by just giving the same old, here's $15,000 for next year. We know the services are just unpredictable and the billing patterns are unpredictable.
The other aspect of that decision is that we know for a fact that several providers are using those funds to prop up their other service lines. And so we're going to have to look at rates for residential and day as to what's inside not only the fee for service that we pay for day, but also what's built inside of the residential band. If I have a provider out there that's making $500,000 on these bands, but they're spending it in their residential program, talking about destabilizing the system, if we pull that $500,000 out. Hi.
Sorry.
So, it's got to be done with much thought and consideration. We've got to look at it on a per provider impact and come up with a solution that we can't, just like the example that Barry gave earlier about several boards that we've helped with their financial operations. You can't just say that a provider's spending extra money in a particular area and therefore we have to fund it at that level. We have to crawl inside it and look at what kind of decisions they're making staffing wise and so forth. So if we flip the bands, it's more than just taking those bands off the table and converting those services to fee for service. We have to look at the remainder of the portfolio and determine if there's any adjustments that need to be made there to make sure the provider is whole.
Transitions with him.
And, we have changed the way we've done business. We haven't just said, okay, you're in trouble, we'll give you more H bands, or we'll swap something out for you. We're actually holding them accountable for the management of the agency. We're looking very closely at overtime and workers' comp and other things. And we're also informing the board of directors when we do so. So it's not just we're having a conversation with the executive director, we're also having a conversation with their board we don't want to leave them in the dark. We don't want them to think that they're doing okay when they're not. So we changed a lot of the processes in preparation for flipping those bands. It just couldn't be done. You couldn't just take that tablecloth and rip it out and hopefully everything stayed on the table. It wasn't going to work that way. It was unfortunate that it couldn't have been easier, but that's where we were. That has been on our project list since day one. But we've got to right size everything first. So.
Yeah, yes, some form of fee for service. I don't know what the fee would be, and I don't know the details, but we could say that we had a proposal to do some form of fee for service between now and July 1st, because that's going to be the only logical way to do it, because there is too much ambiguity in what's going to happen because of the COVID-19, but we should have done it anyway, regardless of COVID-19. But there's way too much ambiguity with COVID-19 not to do fee for service next year, but in some format. And even if we have to do a safety net, that's fine. But we can eventually take that safety net away. But at the beginning, we can do a safety net, just like we did for case management. Does anybody in here not remember that we had a 125% increase in the amount of people that were served when we went to fee for service for case management?
Yep.
Right.
that's going to happen with the other two because they're going to have to in order to build. Right now, they don't have enough incentive. We need more incentive, and that's the way to give it. But anyway, that's the second issue. The first issue we still haven't gotten finished yet, I don't think. Unless we're going to do both at the same time.
Nope.
Well, yeah. But even as I'm looking at the recommended plan of action, there wasn't truly something for us. I mean, we need to develop that plan. That plan, while we have this plan for issue 1, issue 2, we need to do this switch. But not that I ever want to. Well, I don't want to be in a situation where we're being accused of taking an action of ready, fire, aim. Okay. There does need to be the plan put in place, and I think all we're looking for as far as that is, I mean, the recommendation is we'll start to develop the options no later than the end of May. Right. I mean, what do we need authors? I don't think anybody's going to question that. The staff needs to start working on developing those options.
I think that was on there just to give you a heads up that this is what's got to be discussed.
So we're not really talking about taking a vote on anything on problem 2 at this stage. Other than there's a problem, we need to start developing these options now. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
That was for awareness.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
That'll be a battle for another day, I guess.
So
maybe I could make a recommendation that we ask, due to the magnitude of this decision, for the main, the current issue that we're calling option 1, I think, problem 1, would it be, I think it would be viable to have Lori and David review this video of our discussions and wait to vote as a full commission early May, based on the timeline that we just talked about a minute ago, as opposed to voting on this out of committee. Those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I sort of tend to agree with that. I think we need to get enough information to Lori and David so that they can vote on the full commission. And I always am a little bit worried when there's a recommendation coming out of the committee and rightfully so, that they defer a lot to the discussion that happened within the committee. But I don't necessarily know we even have a full consensus within the committee. I don't know, quite frankly, that I'm ready to even vote today because I'm still mulling in my mind those competing interests.
all right. Well, I was kind of surprised that I didn't get any questions from what I sent out yesterday. So would you please look at the stuff and the part that you're mulling over? If you've got questions, please ask those questions so we can get you some answers and some numbers. If you need to see impact numbers or anything like that, let us get that to you. Okay.
And then the other part of that. Oh,
Well, I got one question. I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Page, I think it's page. Well, what is it? Page 3. The paragraph that talks about number 5. Page 3, number 5. That is basically talking about a painted cake, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, and can we honestly say that a painted K is not going to cost us anything because it's been approved, so it won't cost the agency anything anymore than what it's been cost? I mean, none of this extra stuff we're doing is going to cost us any more money. I'm just going to this so we'll understand that we have more liability, I think, than we realize.
Well, if you look at
But is there no liability with that whatsoever?
if you have to look at the net gain and net loss in relation to that, which is why we landed on 50%, because there will be some costs in there, but not nearly the amount that if these day programs are operating at full steam. Yes, they will cost us money, but net, no, because we're losing the revenue capability for at-home day program. Pull back to 50%. That's what that and FMAP's helping us pay for those increases.
question is, this program, I mean, this plan, I don't think takes anything into effect when it comes to us recouping money from the mistakes that were made from 2016 on for the problems that we had. That we don't know how much money, we don't yet know how much money we're going to have to pay to somebody, HHS, for the mistakes that were made from 2016 on, right? That is not, I'm talking about before the coronavirus.
Contract compliance.
That's right, the contracts are clients, right.
It's a whole separate issue.
That's a separate issue.
Right, it is a separate issue, but my point is, we don't know how many millions that's going to cost us yet, do we, next year?
No, we're hoping that we adopt new standards and they let us apply them retroactively, and that would drive the liability down. But that will be decided in the next, we're getting close to those decisions. But there is a liability out there that is separate and apart from this.
That's right. That is my point for the committee to understand.
Yes.
That is a separate liability, and I didn't even look at my notes to see if there was any other liabilities that I hadn't thought of. But that's just one I thought of. We just have a lot of liabilities to consider before we decide how much money we're going to let of this scrap money go away. And that's one of them. And we don't know how many millions that is. Right. And again, $1 million here and $1 million there is a lot of money when it comes at the end.
Well, we've got we're still cleaning up. I mean, the problem is that in the provider world, if you were a good steward and you put your money aside for things that you thought would have to be paid back, whether it was attendance or recoupments from a review or whatever, DDSN never came for it. So you've built this long history of being a paper tiger versus actually going and doing what we say we're going to do. And it's really hard to change when folks get used to that. When you start holding people accountable for numbers and for things they're supposed to do, it's been a hard slog. We found that with case management. We found it, going forward just in this and having the discussion of, well, when that FMAP money comes in, it belongs to the providers. Well, it really doesn't. It's to make sure that services get rendered to the individuals that need the services. That's what it's for. So we want to make sure that happens. And but we will, I mean, I would never ask for a vote. If you're not comfortable to vote, I would never ask that of the committee. I wouldn't ask that of anybody. I think this is a lot of information to digest, and you might need more, or you might need it in a simplified version. However you need us to get it, you let us know what you need, but you got to give us a date for the next meeting. So we need something for the 10th, so y'all get your heads together. And see if you can fit it into your schedule of,
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to call a special meeting, we have to have at least, is it 2 or 3 commission members say that the meeting is needed, right? We can't just call it randomly. Because I remember we ran into this problem previously when we tried to call a special meeting.
I think you are correct.
So
you're a committee of 3. Can that not be the recommendation from the committee?
I think we have 3 commission members that agree that we can for this, and I think it has to be called for the specific purpose.
Right.
So I would make a motion in the subcommittee that the subcommittee approve the scheduling of a supplementary commission meeting
7th or 8th
before, probably. I mean, I think we need to talk to Lori and Dave to see what their schedule looks like, but looking at probably the 7th or the 8th, right?
Yes, that'd be good. 6th, 7th, or 8th would be great.
Yeah, sometime next week, latter half next week. But I would make that motion for the subcommittee.
What day of the week is the 7th and 8th?
Well, the 7th is auditor training, so I'm not going to be available because I'm the Galasso training that we're paying them to come in, so I can't reschedule it. She's got no other availability.
6th or 8th.
The 7th has got to be out unless you don't need me there.
I think you probably want to be there. 6th or 8th.
Yeah, we would certainly so the 6th or the 8th being the primary dates that we're looking at right now. That would be my motion at this point in time.
What's the 6th? What day of the week is the 6th and 8th?
Wednesday and Friday.
Or Friday. So I guess for right now, I'll make this motion and then we'll follow up with because we can't set a date right now, right? Because we don't have two of the commissioners to
But I
pick a
think we
date.
can, but I think we, as the three of us, can approve the calling of a special meeting to be set on one of those two dates based upon their availability.
Okay. So the 6th or the 8th. Okay. All right. So I'll make a motion that the committee approves the scheduling of a supplemental commission meeting to vote on the delivery system day program services and revenue losses from COVID-19 on the May 7th, no, May 6th or 8th, right? Yeah, because Chris wasn't available on the 7th.
I would second that.
And if we had to change it, but anyway, go ahead.
I would second that motion.
Okay, so the motion is approved and carries to do.
We still need to have, we've got a motion and a second. We technically still need to have a vote because there's three of us on the.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so we got a second, right? So everyone in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Just repeat it one more time.
The motion is that the committee approves the scheduling of a supplemental full commission meeting on May the 6th or 8th to address the revenue losses from COVID-19. That's the motion.
Okay, I agree.
And so I think we just said all in favor, aye. Okay, so that motion is passed. Right. Okay.
And so then, now putting on my hat as commission chair,
Yeah.
Mary, can you get staff to get in touch with Dave and Lori and see what date? For the three of us, is there any date that's better? Both those days are open for me right now.
The 8th is better, that Friday, but I could do the 6th if necessary.
Okay. Barry, how about you?
I'll take the 8th. The question is what time. I can take the 8th if that's all right with y'all too. I could do either day, but I just need to know about what time. We talking about 10 o'clock in the morning? Is that what we're talking about? 11 o'clock or what?
10 o'clock's our usual meeting. It might be better if we stuck it at the same time.
That works for me.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that works for me too. If
That works for me.
Dave.
I would actually like Friday better that day. I'm trying to look at my calendar and do the same time. It's hard to do. I am so sorry that I'm in my truck. I should have been better prepared. Thank God I prepared for this last night instead of this morning. I mean, instead of tonight. But anyway, why you don't waste? That's why you don't wait. Sorry.
yeah.
Don't waste for tomorrow what you can do today. But anyway, Friday is good for me, and 10 o'clock is good for me if it's the three of us, and we'll have to see about the other two.
Okay. So if we could, I'd say, Mary, go ahead and reach out directly to them. The other element I would say is, were Lori and Dave given the document, or was that just sent out to the subcommittee?
I think that was just sent to the subcommittee.
Okay, so we definitely want to forward this onto them, and it might be a good idea, Mary, for you to maybe touch base with them and summarize the positions that have come out in terms of that big question of exactly what we're doing as far as paragraph 1 of the recommendation, which I think is
Can we also ask that they would watch this meeting?
That would be fabulous if they can, if they have enough time to do that. So
Yeah.
And we're not done. There's 2 more agenda items on this.
We know. I think we're ready to move forward.
Okay,
Item
sounds
5.
good.
Yeah, item 5, it's super simple. I don't want to keep y'all late. Just letting you know that we do have auditor training starting Thursday morning. We have 120 participants enrolled. Very good representation from auditors. About 40 auditors will be on that training. And so we're looking forward to that. Kevin and I and our teams have partnered to develop the materials. And you guys are welcome to attend it if you would like. I can send you a link to it. We do plan to record it and make it publicly available on YouTube at some point. We have 2 sessions, one Thursday and one on May 12th. We will pick the better of the 2. in case one's more presentable than the other, and publish the one that's best. That's, you know, because this is our first stab at auditor training Thursday. That was my entire report. And if you're interested in attending, just let me know and I'll send you the link to the meeting.
Okay, thanks for that. Next item, the final item, Director of Internal Audit Report, Kevin.
Thank you. Good news is I don't have a formal report because I figured item number 4 was going to be a very heavy lift and I would be ready to go home and get dinner. So,
Right.
right. Will you be ready to get dinner? And these folks will be ready. So that's it. I would just say the training Chris was talking about is 9:30 to 11:30 on Friday. If you're not have anything else to do Thursday morning.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have anything else unless anyone else has anything. We can adjourn.
I have nothing else.
Okay.
I've said enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks all.
you.
Thanks all for the hard
Thank
work.
y'all.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Okay, see
it.
you next week. All right,
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.